All right, everybody. Today we have a very special guest. We have Barbara Lamb, who is a longtime psychotherapist licensed in 1976. She has been a highly trained hypnotherapist and regression therapist since 1984. She became a trainer for the International Association of Regression Research, the Professional Institute of Regression Therapy, and the International Board of Regression Therapists. In 1991, she began regressing people to the details of their extraterrestrial encounters and has regressed well over 2,000 people in over 4,000 regressions to those and to other paranormal experiences. This work and her path life therapy and her soul guidance work continue with sessions in person in San Diego, California, as well as Skype or Zoom. She's also an expert in the UFO phenomenon, as well as a crop circle researcher. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, I am very interested in all of those things you mentioned.
Yeah,
All
I'm
the
always fascinated when I have individuals that have dedicated their lives to these topics and have decades of timing around this because sometimes we have people that come in and out of these topics and they're just here for a minute or two, but I'm always interested in people that have a lot of experience and have longevity in this space. It's very interesting to me. How did you get started?
As you mentioned, I was licensed as a psychotherapist back in 1976 and was doing a regular psychotherapy practice, which was wonderful. But there were certain things that happened to me when visiting other countries, in that I had what I eventually considered spontaneous past life recalls. In other words, in certain places in Peru, particularly, and in Egypt, a couple of trips to Egypt, in certain locations, I suddenly had what seemed like a really vivid memory of having been there in a previous life because I was in different clothing and it seemed to be a long time ago. And sometimes I was a male, sometimes I was a female. So up to that point, I had not really thought that there was any reality to the idea of reincarnation. I knew certain people, many people in the world believed in that, particularly in India and the Far East, but I didn't think there was any reality to it until I began to have these experiences myself that just seemed to come out of the blue. And after about 10 of those instant recalls that were so vivid, I decided, I wonder if there's some way that this could be used therapeutically somehow in my therapy practice. And as synchronicity would have it, I met the woman who had founded the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies and became involved in that training for 5 years to be a past life regression therapist. And then by 1991, it just happened that a young woman came to me who had been really traumatized because very strange beings had been appearing in her room at night and sometimes in the rest of her home in the daytime if she was alone. And she had the feeling that she'd been somehow taken away for a while. Anyway, it was very mysterious and very troublesome for her. And back then in 1991, nobody was talking about this. Nobody was talking, but anyway, nobody she knew, and hardly anybody I knew. But anyway, she asked for regression work, and I did 6 regression sessions with her over a period of a few weeks. And we went each time to a different experience with a different group of extraterrestrial beings. This was really fascinating to me, and it turned out to be very helpful for her, which was the main point, of course. And there were 2 occasions during those weeks when we found out that she had been healed physically by the unusual beings. One time she had an ear infection. It was really painful. And at night, they came to her room. Three very tall white beings came to her room and rolled her over on her side so that the infected ear would be on the upper side. And then she couldn't move, but she could move her eyes around just enough to see that there were these tall beings, very white, paper white, and long, white, thin fingers moving around in her ear. And then she went out of consciousness, which is typical for these
Mm.
experiences. And then a few hours later, she woke up in the morning and her earache was completely gone. They had healed it. And another time, she had been driving along in the car with her sister, which is great because she had a witness to this one.
Mm.
And they were aware that there was a blue beam of light coming in the back windshield window into the car. And I thought, that's really strange. Seemed to be coming from the sky. And then the motor of the car began to peter out. She
Mm.
pulled off the road and the motor stopped. And then both girls jumped out of the car because the beam was still there. And there happened to be an open field right there. And they ran across the field. And the blue beam followed my client while the sister kept on running. And my client stopped because the beam was hitting her in her lower back where she had considerable back pain for quite a while. It was really bothering her. But the blue beam of light just felt so wonderful, very warm and healing. And she began to feel better and better with her back. And then the pain was all gone. And then the beam of life was gone. And the two girls went back into their car and carried on driving to wherever they had been going to. But that healing lasted. And so did the ear healing happen. It kept lasting. It was a thorough, complete healing in both cases. So the seventh time she came in for a session, she was very happy and relaxed and said, I've decided that I am really not only okay with being visited by these strange beings, but I like it. I appreciate them.
Mm.
Really been helping me. So, anyway, that was a really good start for me in working with this. And then that same year, 1991, even though I didn't necessarily think that anybody else would ever come for that particular reason, but it turned out that four other women, independently of each other, came for regressions about the extraterrestrial experiences that they had. So that really got me going. And by that time, I was totally intrigued and was very happy if anybody else would come after that. It's been almost 5,000 people now who have come
Wow.
to regressions simply about extraterrestrial encounters that they have had. So there's a lot of activity going on out there. And not everybody in the world is having visits from these beings, but millions and millions of people are worldwide, certainly in the United States. And it really is a very big phenomenon happening. And what I have learned over the years in regressing people is that there are many different kinds of beings, not just the ones that we hear about all the time, like the little gray beings we hear about,
Mm.
and the reptilian beings, and some of the beings who look more human, like the Pleiadians and the Arcturians, and some other groups too. But there are many types in between of different colors, different sizes, different looks, different skin type, and they all have their own agenda. So once in a while, It's cute. Somebody new will ask me, "Oh, what are the aliens like?" And I'll say, it depends on which ones, because there's so many and they have different things that they do with people, certainly seem to have different intents. So among the whole huge group, I probably have regressed people to, oh, maybe 60 or 70 different types. And I'm saying that because basing it on the experiences that people have had whom I'm regressing and their descriptions of the beings. So when the beings show up in a regression, they don't say, oh, I'm from Andromeda, or I'm an Arcturian, or from Alpha Centauri. They don't give a name for themselves or the planet they're from.
Mm,
If they're specifically asked by the person who's having experiences with them, they might give some location, but some of them say that they don't even have names for their planets or
mm,
each other or even for their whole group of being like we do. We
mm. Right.
absolutely. But they say that they speak telepathically with each other. And so they don't even need individual names like we do.
Mm,
And they automatically know who is being talked about and as much about that person or being as possible. And they certainly know about their planet and they know about many other planets that have life. But again, they don't need to name them because they just know where they are and how to get there and all about them. So it's really a different way of being than our way. But we get so curious and people want to know which planet or which group of beings are these. So sometimes all I can say is this is a description of them that I had. And it turns out in many encounters of this type that there's a variety of beings working with the person who's taken for that
mm,
experience. So, in other words, there might be somebody, for instance, on a medical table being examined, sometimes being treated, being healed. And around the table, there usually are described quite a variety of beings. There might be one of the little gray beings, or even more than one. And there may be a tall, very white being and a taller gray type being who might have brown skin, but he still looks like the gray type of being. There
mm,
might be a mantis being, there might be a reptilian being, there may be a human looking being who's really
mhm.
another planet, there may be a hybrid being or two. Anyway, it usually sounds like there's a whole variety of beings working with the one person who's been taken for
Mm.
the experience.
So it makes sense that if there was more than one group, there would be all the complexity involved with multiple different individuals within that group also. So it makes sense that if someone is being contacted, two people could be contacted by the same group and have two different experiences. There's no uniformity to a group of or to a species, right? There's variety involved. There's different agendas involved. And
And then, of course, each person they take is different. One thing that does seem to be very typical, not for all visits on the spaceships, but for many, is that they are, for a while at least, they're put on a medical table and they're examined. And one of the things that people usually do not like is that they're lying on a kind of a cold, hard table and lots of very bright light around, and they can't move. And there's a good reason for that, actually, why they're made to not move, but they can't move. And then I always have them describe if there's anybody else there with them. And they usually say, yes, they're all around the table I'm lying on. And I'll say, take a good look at them and just describe each one. That's where I get the idea that there are a mingling of different species, one person. And they will describe them. And I'll say, do you see anyone else in the room, or do you get a sense of the size of the room or the shape of the room? In other words, in the regression, I'm asking a lot of questions to bring out more detail, not to influence anything, but just to bring out more of what the person is aware of in
Mm.
living that experience. So very often they will see off to the side a very tall mantis type being
Mm.
to be in charge. He seems to be overseeing whatever the work is going on with the others around
Mm.
the table. And people describe these mantis beings as tall. Sometimes one of them is black, another time one of them is white, green, or even a deep purple. And yet they do sound very much like very tall, 7 feet, 7.5, 8 feet tall, or even taller beings, looking quite like our praying mantis beings, except having much longer legs and arms. Anyway, those mantis beings seem to be very wise, it seems like, to the people seeing them. And then sometimes people are even taken away by a mantis being. They're not always taken by little gray beings. They're taken
Mm.
by a whole variety of beings.
Mm.
But some of them are mantis beings who take them to quite different experiences often. One lady was taken by a mantis being way out in space, and it didn't seem to her that they had any spaceship around her or around them as they were traveling through space, just she and this big, tall mantis being holding her, pulling her along. And it took her to what seemed to her to be a big floating city of lights. That's how she described it. I can see this, seems like a big city just floating there in space, and it's all lit up, glass buildings. It looks like domes and spires and triangle shapes, all kinds of different shapes, all looking like they were made of glass with lots of light shining through them from the inside. And she said it's really quite beautiful, almost sparkly. And
Mm.
she was taken by that one mantis being into one of those glass beings and introduced to a particular extraterrestrial who was of a different type, a different species. And he was teaching her how to look at something and not distort it, because she had built up a habit of looking at these unusual beings who really were okay to look at, but she would, in her own vision, her own mind, she would distort them into horrible, frightening creatures.
Mm.
This male being she was introduced to in that city of light said, we know that you used to watch a lot of horror movies, other, and you would see faces change and you would see horrible depictions of very frightening figures, and that you do that when we visit you too. And we are not to be feared, and we are not frightening, and we are not threatening. So we just want you to see us as we are, and that we're very decent. And
Mhm.
she learned in that particular experience to see beings as they were and not as she was distorting them out of fear from,
Mm. Her perception.
yeah, having watched many horror movies when she was during her growing up years.
I was wondering if we could turn the conversation to hybridization, because this is something I don't think gets talked enough about. And to me, it makes sense that one of the agendas would be to integrate genetics
Mm.
for variety of reasons. Can you talk about that? And through your work, what have you uncovered about hybridization?
Yes, I've uncovered a whole lot because I have met a lot of women who have found out that they have hybrid children living on the ship. They're not human enough in proportion to live here on Earth. And then I began meeting, around 2014 or so. I started meeting people who are here living with us fully as people and who are hybrid also. So I got very interested in that. And then a man from England named Miguel Mendonça started corresponding with me. And he too was meeting hybrids in England. And we had many conversations together and then decided to write a book together about hybrids, which we did. And that book is called
Meet the
The
hybrids.
Lives and Missions of ET Ambassadors on Earth. So I'm going to talk about the two main kinds of hybrids. One type lives on the ship and the other type lives here. So, with the type that lives on the ship, what happens is that eggs are taken from a human woman and sperm taken from a human man. If that woman happens to be married, it would most likely be taken from her husband. She's
Mm.
not married, doesn't have a partner. The sperm would be taken from some other man of interest to the other beings. Anyway, the sperm and the egg are taken on board the ship and they're mixed together, forming an embryo. And then into that mixture is added extraterrestrial genetics. And usually, from the hybrids I know anyway, the genetics come from more than just one extraterrestrial species. They come from maybe three or four or five, or in one case, six different extraterrestrial species. All of that is put into that little embryo. Then the embryo is planted in the uterus of the woman, and she becomes pregnant. And she carries that pregnancy for 2 months or 2.5, maybe 3 months at the most. And she is declared pregnant by her own doctor here. And sometimes that makes sense because she's married and wouldn't be
But there
surprised.
are other instances when a woman becomes pregnant and she has not had sexual intercourse with anyone within the time frame, and all of a sudden she's pregnant
Oh,
and
right.
she doesn't know what's going on. Is this correct too?
Absolutely, you're right. And sometimes she hadn't been with a man for maybe 8 or 10 years, and yet here she is suddenly pregnant. So
Mm.
it's very baffling in those
And
ways.
then correct me if I'm wrong, but like then, like you said, 2 to 3 months later, she will find that she is not pregnant and that
Right.
there is no fetus there. So at a certain point in time, there was another contact. Is this what happens?
Yes, and she's usually not aware of those contacts at all. Complete mystery. And when she goes back to the doctor and says, I don't know what happened, but I don't feel pregnant anymore. And he'll check her and say, no, you're not. And then
Mhm.
he usually will say, when did you have your miscarriage? And she said, I didn't have a miscarriage.
She'd be aware of that.
Would have noticed that, would have felt it and seen it. And then he might say, when did you have your abortion? She said, I did not go for an abortion. So it's a mystery what happened to that embryo. So the
Mhm.
doctor will usually say something like, sometimes the embryo pulls away from the wall of the uterus and just gets absorbed into the rest of the system. And they just write it off as that must have happened. But really, that's not what happened. The fetus had been removed and taken by the beings and put in the ship, had been put in a glass tank of special fluid to gestate for the rest of the 9 months. And the tank has been described by a number of people whom I have regressed, and it all sounds the same. The tank seems like it's glass, would be big enough to hold a full-term baby, and that glass tank is attached by wires and tubes to what seems to be a monitoring machine, probably monitoring the temperature and the light and whatever chemicals they might add into the fluid. And then after the full term of gestating, that baby is removed by the beings and wrapped up in clothes and then raised like a regular baby, but it is a hybrid baby. And those babies usually look more extraterrestrial than looking human. They are going to be living their whole lives on the ships or maybe one of the other planets with the beings. They will not be human enough to come and live on Earth. So that's one type. Then another type, the type that I have been very familiar with and know a number of, is the hybrids who are living here on Earth. So it can start the same way with the egg and the sperm being taken and mixed together, an embryo created and fertilized by the ET DNA and then put in the woman uterus. But in this case, they leave that embryo to develop into a fetus, into a full-term baby. They leave that in the womb, and the mother gives birth to that baby, like we do with all, and that baby is human enough, much more proportionally human. And everybody thinks this is a perfectly normal baby. It goes up into childhood and teenage years and adulthood, lives its whole life here. And these babies and people, as they grow older, look absolutely human, but they do have some extraterrestrial DNA in them, and they do have some special abilities that most of us don't have, the DNA from the other beings. In other words, even from a very young age, these hybrids have a variety of psychic skills. Even at age 2 or 3, if they see a wounded animal or a wounded bird or a friend who has a cut or even a parent who is hurt, they would just automatically go over and raise their hands and heal, send out healing energy from their hands and heal whatever it is that needs fixing. It's very effective healing. I've talked to couple of people who've been healed by these very young children. And one little child was asked what he was doing when healing his mother of a very bad cut. And he said, "Oh, I'm doing my space Reiki." Now, he had been a little boy, he was about age 4 at that point, and he'd already, from earliest times, been talking about his wonderful space friends who would come and take him. She had many experiences. And one of the things that they did with him on the spaceship was to teach him how to heal others. And they taught him the movements, which were very Tai Chi, according to the mother. And there he was, just doing this wonderful healing where he completely healed up this very bad cut that his mother had, came right together as he was doing his healing energy and movement and remained healed. These children have lots of psychic abilities too. They can just see somebody and know, oh, that person has a headache over on the right side of his head, or oh, that lady over there really has a very uncomfortable stomach, or in other words, they're medical intuitives, medical psychics. And very often they can communicate telepathically with animals. Some of the hybrids are better at it than others. Really excellent and can help find lost animals, psychic abilities, and help police departments and families who've lost an animal. And anyway, they show a whole variety of skills, and they seem to be very tuned in also to saving the resources of the earth. In other words, not let a garden hose just run aimlessly with with not watering any plants, but just like watering the driveway, and be left to run. And one little girl I know had a great concern about saving water. She was only about 3 years old, and she had not heard that from her parents or anybody, but she just had a natural instinct to preserve precious things like water,
Mm,
water and life in all forms and all resources. As she grew older and became more aware of our resources,
mhm.
involved in trying to save them. These kids who are hybrids, looking like regular kids, acting like regular kids, but they really do have many more abilities. And for many people, they stand out as, wow, how does that kid know that?
And oftentimes they remember, or I've been told they can remember past lives. Their ability to recall is usually above average, shall we say.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one of the other things I wanted to touch on here is because, like I said, this particular aspect of the phenomenon doesn't get talked a lot about, despite the fact that there have been some very credentialed people like yourself in the past that have studied this, like Dr. John Mack,
Oh,
David
yeah.
Jacobs. These are very credentialed individuals from prestigious universities that were studying this. And I feel, and maybe this is just me, but I feel like the narrative is that the abduction phenomena has either cooled off or it isn't happening as often. And I don't know if that's true or not. So someone like you who's had your finger on the pulse for a while, can you say, is this just continuing and it's ever present now as it was in the 80s, 90s, and forever?
I think I feel sure it is continuing now because people continue to come to me for regression to experiences that they've had this year or last year or very recent years. So it seems like that activity is still happening, but more and more people now are coming to me in the last, say, year or two for not for finding out about extraterrestrial experiences, but for finding out their real soul purpose for their being
Mm,
in this life. And I just can't tell you how many people, it's been a lot, who've come for that particular reason. In other words, the person might be male, might be female, but might be in his or her 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they've worked for quite a number of years in most cases, and in many cases developed a really wonderful career where they're moving right up in the business world, the corporate world. But at a certain point, they've stopped and they've pulled out because they have a sense that they're really supposed to be doing something else.
mm,
And something else usually has to do with some kind of wonderful service that they do for other people, like healing or bringing messages or doing more psychic work and doing channeling work in some cases. Yeah. And so I have found that those people either have already left their work and made the change to doing what they really feel more called to be doing, or they're making a decision to do that. And they probably will be leaving the work
mm.
doing for years and get into that other aspect of work. Seems to be more service oriented, service to others oriented.
Yeah, it makes sense that there's probably more people now gravitating towards their passions because we're entering a time now where this topic is more accepted. There's lots more people talking about it. So people are maybe waking up to the idea that maybe they did have a life purpose when they came in here. And we're also entering this vast technological age with the rise of AI. You're going to be seeing a lot of jobs in certain markets are going to be evaporating, which is going to leave large swaths of the population to have a minute to think for a second. Hey, what do I really want to do? How am I really going to contribute to society? Because I don't think they're going to have a choice. I think that day is coming very rapidly.
Yeah.
I wanted to maybe switch gears for a second because you've studied the crop circle phenomenon, and it's something I'm deeply fascinated by. I'm a geometry instructor, so I love the geometry of the formations. I'm intrigued by the stories. And there was one formation I wanted to pull up here because I know you've spoken about it. It touches on the Shoemaker-Levy comet that
Right.
impacted Jupiter. So what I'd love to do is pull that up first, and then maybe you can tell everybody what was Shoemaker-Levy and then how this crop circle relates to that.
Okay.
All right, so let's pull this one up here. Let me know when you can see this.
There, I see it.
Okay, so
Yep.
can you tell everybody first of all, what was the Shoemaker-Levy comet, and then how does this relate to that?
The Shoemaker-Levy comet traveled long distance across our skies and collided with Jupiter. And that was in actually August of, or July, sorry, of 1994. And in England, it was a phenomenal thing going on that in the springtime of that year, a pattern that looked very much like this one, but in a new green wheat field, that appeared. And we all wondered, what on earth does that mean? And it turned out that was a harbinger or a preview of a whole series of crop circles that was going to happen starting in July. So, at a certain date in July 1994, when the Shoemaker-Levy comet was actually moving across space with 21 pieces in it, like 21 circles in the tail of this figure. And when it hit Jupiter, it made an impact mark that looked very much like the big circles and ring toward the left there, not exactly like that. But in any event, there was a photograph taken of that impact site on Jupiter. And that very same night, there was a crop circle made in exactly that pattern,
Mm.
striking point on Jupiter. And then, first of all, this picture that we're looking at was a depiction in the crop circle of the first part of the Shoemaker-Levy comet just before it hit Jupiter.
And
And
they viewed this, did they not? They calculated when this was going to happen, and they actually viewed it with telescopes, and they watched
again,
each fragment smack into it, correct?
and took wonderful photographs of that. The crash site looked just like the pattern that appeared as a crop circle that night. And then every time, like about every other day, when another piece of that comet was hitting Jupiter, there was another crop circle that depicted that. Another was a pattern somewhat similar to this, but always with one fewer circle in its tail as another piece would hit Jupiter. So every time the comet hit Jupiter, there would be another crop circle here in England that very same night until all the pieces had hit Jupiter. And then the very last crop circle in that pattern showed a circle of circles with a ring around it. And the way that some of us have interpreted that means that whole phenomenon of the comet hitting Jupiter was completed. All of the pieces had hit. It was all wrapped up.
And this was all in 1994.
Yeah, July and August.
So there was a series of crop circles that came up as a little show in real time, explaining to people what was going on there.
Yeah. So it was as above, far out there in space, so below here on our ground on Earth. It was just an amazing thing to realize. So those of us who were there were following the actual event in the sky in the newspapers. The newspapers were very good at showing each time the comet hit Jupiter.
Mm.
And then, lo and behold, we would notice it in one of the counties in southern England, mostly Wiltshire, but some of the other counties too, a crop circle depicting what was left of the comet with one fewer piece in it. It was just extraordinary, the coordination from space to Earth in that
Mm.
sense. And that reminds me to say that many of the crop circles have shown celestial events. Significant. One of them, for instance, showed the depiction of a solar eclipse and with the sun moving and then
What
and
year was that one? Because I know the one you're talking about, and I'll know it as soon as I see it. Do you know what year that one was?
that was in the early 1990s
Let me see
as
if I don't know if I
well.
can find that one. I
Yeah,
know the
that
one you're talking about. It's like a series of circles, and they keep showing like almost like an eclipse getting closer and closer.
uh-huh. Right.
Yes, I know the one you're talking about.
So also they've shown some of the crop circles have shown very long-term sun cycles, and others have shown moon cycles. And when I mention cycles, multi thousands of years in these cycles. And yeah, so every once in a while, there would be a crop circle showing something important going on in space, reflected here in our land as a crop circle. But you are right about the geometries. In 1996, we began to have fractal geometries. Before that, we had triangles and circles with rings around them. And even in 1991, near Cambridge, England, we had a beautiful pattern called the Mandelbrot set of fractal geometry.
I
And
know that one well. Before you tell that story, let's pull. Can we pull that one up? Do you mind if I pull that one up before you tell that story?
yes, I'm not able to, but you can.
Okay, let me pull it up here. The Mandelbrot set.
And while you're doing that, I will tell you the story with that. Professor Mandelbrot, who
Yes,
either discovered or was one of the early pioneers in terms of fractal geometry. He was a professor at Princeton University, but in that one particular year, 1991, he had been in England at Cambridge University being a guest teacher, teaching about fractal geometry. And right after he left, after his teaching obligation was completed, they noticed about 9 miles outside of Cambridge, where he had been teaching, there was this beautiful big depiction of a Mandelbrot set named after him. And that began a series of fractal crop circle patterns. So that was 1991. And then in 1996, at a field across from where, yeah, that's the Mandelbrot set. It shows one of the features of fractals is that whatever the original pattern is, which looks in this case more like a rounded heart shape, that there are other circles coming off of it. Could be extended that there would be a circle off of each circle and a circle, that circle into infinity if one wanted to depict such a thing. In 1996, across from Stonehenge, in a wheat field off a main road, main commuter road, people coming back from work late afternoon, suddenly there in the light of day, it had been made in the light of day, was a beautiful big crop circle called the Julia set.
We're going to pull that one up right now.
Good fractal geometry. I'm so glad you have the pictures.
Yeah, we got to show the pictures because this is just
And we know,
this is really important for people to take a look at this
yeah,
because the story
yeah,
behind this one is mind blowing, right? Because not
yeah,
only did this show up in the middle of the day, it showed up in the middle of the day across the street from Stonehenge,
right.
which is a pretty busy tourist area. So nobody's sneaking out into the field to make 1,000-foot Julia set, which is a highly complex fractal geometry, as you've said. And so this one is very interesting.
It's
And
a perfect Julia set. And off each one of those big circles, there are, as you can see, two other circles coming out. So it's really a very complex pattern. And we know that it must have been made in a 35-minute window of time because there was an airplane pilot flying over that area, taking one passenger, a very small plane. And he was very keen, as they say, very interested in crop circles. So he was looking at all the fields and including that particular field, no crop circle in it. So he dropped off his passenger and then got back in his plane and flew back the direction he had come from to the west. And then, flying over this field, he noticed that there was this crop circle that had happened just while he was dropping off his passenger. And a whole long row of cars had stopped along that main motorway there because they had seen this in a field and a bit in the distance there, but they could see it from the road. So this was a beautiful crop circle, and I spent a whole afternoon in it and noticed that every one of those circles
mm,
whirled in a different way. And the
right.
bigger ones all had a different shape of standing center at the center of the circle swirl. It was a beauty.
Yeah, this one is very intriguing because obviously we know the pilot went over and came right back and it was there. It wasn't there, then it was there. If human beings were going to go out there and make this in the field, number one, this would take them a lot of time. You would need teams of people out there. You're not doing this under the nose of management, whoever's watching Stonehenge across the street. You can't do that. That's not happening. And
No.
so this shows up very quickly. I think it's 1,000 foot across, a lot of circles. This one is truly stunning.
And do you have the one that came about 2 weeks later? It
With
has three swirls like that, except that they're
yes,
swirled in the opposite direction.
yes, I know the one you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. We call this the triple Julia. It happened in a different field and probably about an hour's drive away from where the original one was, but appearing suddenly overnight. And I spent many hours in that one too. And again, each circle had a different kind of center swirl. And in one of them, instead of the wheat being laid down in a like radiating out from the center of a circle, it had a triangular shape of wheat and shaped upright like a pyramid.
Mm.
And it happened to have three crystals in that pyramid. We don't know how, why, who, but
Wait a
it,
second. We got to talk about that for a second. You telling me that people found like actual like quartz crystals
yes,
in this?
in the middle of that little triangle made of wheat in the middle of one of those circles.
And how big were those?
Oh, maybe a couple of inches big, not huge crystals, but just a little collection of crystals. I mean,
Interesting.
how they got there, who put them there, if a person put there, or if they were part of the original making of the crop circle. It's one of those many mysteries that we kept discovering in crop circles.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
There's one more I want to bring up, and then maybe we get wrap this up by having a quick macro conversation about the phenomenon itself. But I would like to bring up the Barbury Castle
Oh, yeah.
because that's something I've talked about it a few different times on the podcast, but I always like to get someone's perspective who's actually been in it.
Behind you, of your right shoulder.
And I have a picture of it right behind me. Yeah, I find it a very interesting design. So can you see this now?
Oh, beautifully. This particular crop circle, which happened in 1991 in Wiltshire County at a place called Barbury Castle, which is really a big ancient hill fort, not a structured castle. But anyway, in the field down below, suddenly overnight was this beautiful crop circle. And this one particular crop circle, out of the few thousand crop circles that there have been in that part of England, this particular one is what got many of the crop circle researchers to jump in with enthusiasm to the whole phenomenon, to become dedicated researchers, having
Mm.
seen this one picture, even if they saw the pictures years later after it had happened, that this is the one that compelled people to be particularly devoted to researching phenomenon. So it's been interpreted in many different ways, but I think that we could say overall that it's seeming to represent different dimensions of reality. And maybe that's why it resonates with people without realizing that. Now, I flew over that in a little helicopter, just me and the pilot, open door right where I was sitting. I was belted in, so that was good. But I was able to just look right out this door right by my side and take wonderful pictures of it, and was just amazed at this pattern. So big and so beautiful.
Mm.
And then I was with a group of crop circle researchers from England by synchronicity, happened to be steered into their meeting, Center for Crop Circle Studies in England. And in came a young man with a manila folder. And in that folder was a picture of this crop circle, which had appeared that day. And when I saw that picture, I realized my arm was flying up in the air. And I was saying, I'm in, which,
Right.
which means that was my first year of visiting crop circles. But when I saw this picture, oh, okay, I'm in, which meant to me that I'm going to keep on researching this, which I did in person for 27 years.
Wow.
So it's been a very avid interest. And the head of that group threw his head back and said, "Oh, beyond the pale." It was just so remarkable. And as I say, it's been interpreted in many different ways by different people. But
Mm.
let's just leave it is that it was a very remarkable pattern that drew a lot of us in to being devoted crop circle
I'm
research.
not, I've been told this. Maybe you can answer this for me. I don't know if you remember this or not, but I was told that the night this came down, there was actually, because Salisbury Plain is not far from there, the military installation, I believe.
It's
And
about an hour drive away from there.
okay. Okay. So then maybe I'm mistaken. But I thought I was told that maybe the power had gone out in and around this thing the night it came down. Are you familiar with that story?
I'm not familiar with that story, and I was staying right in that area,
Okay.
so I didn't notice anything like that happening. I was there
Okay.
when it came down.
Wow.
Mm.
That's amazing. Maybe we could just wrap this up by having a quick macro conversation about the crop circle phenomenon. After all that time, you must have some thought process, some idea about maybe the purpose of it or what may be causing it or something along those lines. I know it's a very difficult question to
Oh,
answer, but something is clearly going on.
right.
Um, what
Indeed, it
what
certainly did. And it seems to be very deliberate, very intelligent, very purposeful. I think it's coming from somewhere else, not from the earth. I think it's coming from above somehow. And whatever is behind this is very intelligent and very artistic and very knowing about us humans. For instance, there are quite a number of crop circles that have been in spiritual symbols, which we know. Christian crosses, a pattern for crop circles, and each one with different details about it. But the Christian cross has appeared a number of times through the years. And also in that same field with the Barbury Castle crop circle you just showed, in another year, 1999, there was a beautiful pattern of the Kabbalah tree of life
I know
pattern
the one you're talking about. Yeah.
in a yellow crop, a oilseed canola crop. And then another year, right around then, in another field there at Barbury Castle, there was a beautiful Jewish menorah, uh,
Mm,
the candle, the candelabra, and had in that field of several feet away a depiction of the typical oil lamp, which was often used to light the candles. And then there have been Arab spiritual symbols, sometimes in crop circles. And a number of times there have been the Chinese mandala symbol. And each time that symbol has shown up, it has a different kind of border around it. Or in one cases, there were two of the yin yang mandala incorporated into that one pattern. We're thinking whatever this intelligence is, it's really aware of our spiritual traditions and letting us know that this intelligence is aware of that, like
mm,
honoring us. And then there are symbols like there have been a number of tree of life symbols. Some of them are more generally spiritual rather than specifically religious. And there have been lots of geometry. Circles, there was a Sierpinski gasket, which I had never heard of until Popsicle appeared in 1999. And lots that show like threefold geometry, fourfold, fivefold, sixfold, sevenfold, eightfold, ninefold, tenfold geometry. And there was a wonderful geometry expert named Michael Glickman who lived in Wiltshire County. And during the winter, he would be studying the geometries of the crop circles that had happened the previous summer. And he came up with some remarkable insights. And I personally had not been interested in geometry until I became interested in the crop circles. So many that have really amazing geometries in them, and all kinds of different patterns, some more beautiful than others. Some show a series of planets or a series of stars in a particular pattern, probably reflecting what's up there in our sky. And some of them have shown the Earth in relation to the solar system. 1995, it was auspicious because there was a perfect depiction in a crop circle of our solar system and the various rings of the solar system, but the Earth is missing. Everything else, every other planet is spaced perfectly in that crop.
Mhm.
Earth isn't even there at all. And then there was another one showing the solar system with the asteroid system around it, ring of asteroid bits and pieces around it. And yeah, quite a number of them have shown celestial bodies to other celestial bodies. So overall, I think that we're being shown a lot of what's out at space and also shown that they, the authors, the creators of these crop circles, know a lot about Earth and humanity. And by showing some of our very special symbols. And then there are hundreds that we think, oh, that's interesting, but we have no idea what it might be depicting. It might have a special meaning that we don't even know about. But there's some ancient Egyptian symbols that have shown up in some crop circles. And that's been interesting. So, I mean,
Yes.
huge variety of patterns. And some
Yeah.
of them show about physics, about the torus of energy, the way that physics, the way that energy works. It was one crop circle.
You're
And
referring to the Taurus knot, right?
yes, in Eastfield, Alton Barnes.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's let me see if I can pull that one up real quick. Then we can wrap this up. But do you remember what year that was? That
It was
was
1990s.
I know because do you know who Lucy Pringle is?
Oh, yeah, I know Lucy Pringle.
Okay, yeah. She brought one of her friends into that one who was suffering from maybe Parkinson's, and she got some temporary relief when she entered it. That was that's something we haven't talked about is some of the alleviation of symptoms that some very sick people have when they enter these things. And there is a bit of a mixed bag when people go in, to my understanding, is some people actually don't feel very well when they go in them. They get disoriented.
Or some definite energies that are different in the crop circle. Even it's very specific. The increase of energy is within the confines exactly of whatever the crop circle pattern is. So even if you step 1 foot outside of one of those crop circles, there's no energy. It's just very specifically within the crop circle. Yeah, Lucy Pringle herself had a very painful shoulder that had gone on for months. And she took a friend one day into one of the crop circles in Wiltshire, and they took a thermos full of their good old English tea and had a picnic. And so they were there for a few hours, just sitting and looking around that crop circle. And then when she was on the way home again, she realized, oh, my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. It had been completely healed in that crop circle. So she began a long-term study, which she may still be doing, to collect people's testimonies of healings that they have experienced in crop circles.
Yeah, I interviewed her maybe about a year ago, and
Oh,
we
good.
went through a lot of her work. And one of the symptoms of one of her friends, who I believe had Parkinson's, had terrible tremors, couldn't write. And when she wrote, it was completely scratched all over the paper. And so one of the sort of tests they did was have this individual write before she enters and then write something after. And it was legible after she had spent some time in there. And so they've run many tests. They've done brain scans just on the edge of them and then while they're in them. And so they're coming up with clues as to certain brainwave patterns that alleviate symptoms, which that's fascinating to say the least.
Oh, yes, and it's significant also. The energies in crop circles could probably be used for so many things that we don't even think of that they could be used to help with. But that picture that you just had, the Taurus, comment about that, because this sort of shows there seems to be some sort of interactive effect between us here on the earth and circle makers. So the day before this was made, this crop circle, there was a man, a physicist named Jim Lyons, who was giving a lecture at the Glastonbury Symposium, which involved crop circles and other phenomena. And he was giving a lecture that particular day. And he was talking about how energy moves. And he showed us a diagram just like this, the way that energy moves. And that very night, at a field 2 hours drive away from there, where he'd given the lecture, this crop circle pattern appeared as a crop circle, exactly the same pattern that he had shown in his lecture.
Was he showing a three-dimensional version of a torus?
Yes.
And this is a two-dimensional representation of that.
Yeah, he must have been a two-dimensional
Okay.
because he was showing it as a slide.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, what are the chances that a person would be talking about this and making a big point about it, and then that very same pattern that night appeared in a field as a crop circle? So
It's unlikely.
that sort of thing has happened enough times that some of us have experimented with just asking in meditation, just asking for a particular pattern to be made. And every time I know of that, I have participated in that, usually with a few other people or maybe even a bigger group. That night, that pattern is made as a crop circle.
I've heard this from other researchers as well. I know that Karen Alexander and Andy Thomas had a group and they performed this same sort of experiment. Andy even showed me the picture in the crop circle that showed up, and it's very similar. Jeff Wilson, an American researcher, they performed an experiment and same thing. They were in a Native American museum, and one of the exhibits had a statue of a Native American woman with an earring. And they had said, wow, earring would make a really interesting crop circle. And so they meditated on that and thought that they would show up here in the States near where they were, when in fact it had actually shown up in Italy the day, I think it was maybe like a day or two before they had even decided to discuss it. And so there's everyone I've spoken to who has spent a significant amount of time researching this phenomenon has a story like that, where they have an undeniable synchronicity that is extremely personal to them. And when they explain it to me, I say, you know what, if that had happened to me, I'd be scratching my head too.
So anyway, I think that one of the reasons why it intrigues me so much about the crop circles is that it seems like the whole phenomenon is connected to something that we don't quite put our fingers on, but it's so big, it's so vast. I think there really is intelligence that is of some sort that is communicating with us. Now, people wonder how crop circles are made. There are man-made ones, and I'm not going to be talking about those. But with the genuine ones, some people have seen, a couple of people I know of who have seen a beam of light coming down from the sky into a field of growing crop. And then either later that day or the next day, they noticed that where it seemed like that beam landed in the field, there is a new crop circle. And some people have actually witnessed something invisible moving along the top of the crop, like a little wind, just in a certain pathway only, not
Mm.
in the field. And then it will stop. And then it's been witnessed that whatever the wheat was or the crop growing there, it suddenly was down and little bits and pieces of it were flying up in the air. And then that little riffling along the top of the crop went back in the direction it had come from to the end of the field. And the people who witnessed this then went out in that field and noticed that at that spot there was a new crop circle. So they had seen it being made, but they couldn't see what was making it. And that could very well have happened at that Julia set pattern that happened in that half-hour window of time near Stonehenge. That it wasn't like an object, it wasn't people, it was just some sort of force, some sort of vibration laying it down. But whatever it is, it has not only great intelligence, but significant meaning to it. So you see, my personal work, starting in 1991, included my first crop circle visit and included my first few people I had experienced to extraterrestrial encounters. So it's easy for me to think that, ah, maybe it's extraterrestrial beings of some kind who are managing to come here and either send down a beam of light or like that wind moving across the field, or in some cases, it has been witnessed that an orb or two orbs of bright white light will make a crop circle. And that was filmed in 1996, a place called Oliver's Castle.
I've seen the video.
Yeah.
I know that's highly controversial as well.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. And very impressive. Yes, I happened to be there when the young man brought that videotape.
at the Barge Inn, you were there?
Oh, yeah, I was right there.
Oh, wow. So obviously he shows this video. So what is your thought on that then? Because I know it is controversial.
I personally think it's very genuine because the footage of that videotape had been submitted to different film labs in England and Scotland and Hollywood. And all of the reports came back that no, it didn't look like anything had been dubbed in here at all. It looks like genuine footage.
I know other researchers say the same thing, but there's a split for sure. I know some researchers will not hang their hat on that because of the shenanigans involved with John Whaley. I think his real name was John Wabe, who
Oh,
did work at a who was working at a video editing place. But the problem was, is like, there in the footage shows the same crop circle that did show up the night before. I think it was confirmed that it wasn't there the night before. He shows up that morning with this video. And so I think he would have had to run all the way to Bristol from there, which is a long ride to doctor up this video and then bring it back. And we're talking what, 1996, 7?
96, yeah.
Yeah. So it's controversial. And I can see how some people that have made their name in this would not want to endorse it. But yeah, it is very suspicious because it's here you have this video that looks like balls of light, and there are other videos of balls of light. That's not the only video we've ever seen. That's the most fantastic one I've ever seen. But yeah, so that's an interesting one. So you were there. So he shows up in the Barge Inn. So
Well, yeah, and he was there. He was there before noontime. In other words, he filmed that early morning. I don't know what time exactly, maybe 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. It was just starting to become daylight.
Mhm.
I happened to be camping up on a hill, Oliver's Castle, and at the bottom of the hill was this big, beautiful wheat field where the popsicle was made. And he had his video camera with him, so he just something disturbed him, and he woke up and grabbed his video camera, headed down the hill into the field, and caught that footage. Okay, so he would have had to go back to, I think it was Bristol, which was quite a distance away from where this crop circle was, and go into the lab and do whatever he did, if he did anything, which I don't think he did. But anyway, and then he brought it back before noon to the area where the crop circle field is, and into the barge inn, and gave it to the bartender, saying, when the researchers come in,
But
be
also
sure.
somebody would have had to go on into the field and make it too. So
Yes, that's right. And
because
not
because the crop circle was there. It's not like he
yeah,
photoshopped that in. It was actually there.
so Michael Glickman and his partner, who were very experienced in crop circles and the crop circle energies and so forth, they went into that crop circle and they said, oh, it was absolutely loaded
Buzzing.
with energy, and it was one of the genuine ones.
Fascinating.
All ways of determining that. And they were very knowledgeable, as knowledgeable as anybody. And so those things make me think that it really was genuine footage.
Fascinating. Barbara, I really appreciate your perspective on all these topics. Like I said, it's always a pleasure to meet someone and talk to someone with experience who's dedicated themselves to these topics. It's a pleasure, and I respect people that have longevity in this. This is really cool. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm just excited that you are so interested and so knowledgeable about the crop circles.
Yeah, it is endlessly fascinating. There's
Yes.
two things that really fascinate me. One is the fact that this is actually going on. And number two is that more people aren't interested, or at least don't ask enough questions about it. That's almost as interesting to me as the fact that it's happening anyway.
Right,
Because if you spend a little bit of time and a little bit of research, read a few books, watch a few documentaries, you can start to understand that, hey, not every single crop circle that ever shows up has these hallmarks of mechanical flattening. Some of them just don't have those hallmarks. And so
right.
you have a real mystery on your hand here.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
after all these years, it's starting when people started noticing crop circles in 1980, the early 1980s, Colin Andrews. And even though a few circles had been detected in field before that, but the more attention that people have given to this phenomenon, the more elaborate and the more numerous the circles have been, the crop circles.
wow.
I personally feel very convinced that there's definitely a communicating going on between us who are interested in this and whatever that intelligence is, which seems to be there.
Yeah, a friend of mine, I'm sure Gary King,
Yeah,
Gary told me, he said, once the researchers started paying attention to this in the 80s and 90s, it started to evolve.
yes.
And things like it was changing. It was almost like it was responding to the attention. And
It even did that in the 1980s. Started with a simple, beautifully laid down crop circle covered by Colin Andrews on his way home from work one day. And he actually saw this down a hillside at the bottom. He thought, what is that? And he started, he went down. He said, wow, all these blades of wheat have been just laid down so perfectly in this perfect circle and perfect swirl. And how amazing. And then he began to keep a lookout to see if there was anything more. And then he met the pilot, Busty Taylor, who had heard about these. He was interested. And so they started flying up. This was probably mid 1980s. And they decided one day, oh, here, I love this. They were talking to each other in the small plane, just Busty, the pilot, and Colin, the one passenger, and flying over a field. And they were saying, oh, that's interesting. We've seen a circle. I wonder if we could see more, if more could be happening, like a circle with a ring around it. And that night, a new crop circle was formed with a circle and a ring around it. And then they were talking in the airplane another day and said, gee, we've got a circle, and a ring. I wonder if we could possibly ever see something like a Celtic cross, which has Celtic cross has a circle in it.
Yeah, so there was multiples of those,
Yeah.
but
And
they
so,
said that out loud.
yeah, just in their own conversation, it's the two of them, in this little tiny airplane. And then that night, there was a picture, a crop circle that happened in the field, with nobody else having heard this conversation, or nor was it repeated to anybody. But that night, still, a crop circle with a cross and the circle in it, the Celtic cross, was formed in a field.
Wow.
Even back in the early days, there seemed to be an interactive effect. We experimented with many times in the 1990s and afterwards. But
So amazing.
something going on. Then there was in 1999, I think it was, there was a, a Japanese group came over from
Mm,
Japan, and they sat up on Silbury Hill, which is an ancient hill built by people many centuries ago, and in the middle of crop circle territory. So they were sitting up on top of that hill, it's flat up there, and meditating. And they decided to ask the circle makers, whoever they are, to make a pattern that would represent the Japanese culture. And so they all meditated on that, asking for that one afternoon. And then that night, there was a beautiful pattern made, which we discovered the next morning. And it was a pattern of Japanese origami. It was a
interesting.
beautiful symbol of Japanese culture. And then, with the success of that, the same group meditated again, asked for another symbol, and another one happened, oh, quite a few miles away, closer to Barbury Castle. And that was a Japanese symbol too, with a circle and a ring in it, and then these three beautiful kind of intertwined crescent shapes. And that apparently, I did not know that beforehand, but that is one of the Japanese symbols as well. So
Fascinating.
that's what got some of the rest of us interested. Let's try that ourselves and have very good luck with it.
Man, it's such a fascinating conversation. But Barbara, again, I really want to thank you for your time. I'm going to have you back on so that we can chat some more about this. We could pull up some more crop circles and tell some more stories because I find it endlessly fascinating. So thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Great pleasure.